About 7 months ago, I had shoulder surgery. I did everything right, got my full range of motion back, and was fully cleared at around 5 months. Then, about 2 weeks ago, I tore the repair right back off, and I'm back at square one. And it's kind of funny. The week I got injured again, I actually wrote a script about how good my shoulder surgery went, so I could share my experience with other people that were maybe thinking about the same thing. But I never recorded it, and then this happened. But to understand how I got here, we have to go back a little bit. So back in high school, I got introduced to an anime that you all might know. It's called Haikyuu. And that's what made me pick up volleyball. And after about 2 months of touching a volleyball for the first time, I ended up on the high school volleyball team. And at the time, I had no idea that sport would become both the best and worst thing that would happen to me. Funny thing is, I was on the bench most of the time. I do have a clip from senior year though. Right before COVID hit, it was actually the last game before COVID started. Fun fact, I'm one of those 2020 graduates. But yeah, it was the, I think, second time I ever actually played. Yeah, good times. So during one practice in high school, I dove for a ball. I landed upside down and I slid on my right shoulder and it dislocated. I popped it back in and kept playing like nothing happened. In college, I found out that my shoulder was actually pretty weak. The rehab lady there did like the test on me where like you stick out both your arms and she pushes them, and my left arm was okay, my right arm went phew. And so from that, I kind of assumed that was why my hitting was so bad. It wasn't. I always thought that if I jumped higher, I would hit better. That's a lie, by the ways. So I ended up playing volleyball in college. Um, I joined the club team with my friends, and by the last year of college, I was kind of burnt out. I only really played for 2 years because the first 2 years were COVID, so we didn't really get access to like the rec center and etc. I actually started boxing, and I joined the Counter Strike team for my college. So after I graduated and moved back home, I ended up tearing my shoulder boxing. And ironically, I have that on video also. So the surgeon told me that I tore my labrum, which the labrum is basically like the cushion inside your rotator cuff, kind of. And I had two options. I either rehab it or I go through surgery. I chose neither, and that actually worked out pretty well for me for a little bit until the next year came and I went back to college to play a grass volleyball tournament with my friends as like a little reunion game. And in that tournament, I proceeded to dislocate my shoulder again. And this time, my new surgeon told me I tore the front of my labrum completely off. And honestly, I could feel it because my shoulder wasn't only in pain, but I couldn't even open doors without my shoulder like slipping out of the socket. So I went through with the surgery. I spent 6 weeks in a sling and a few months after that in rehab. But interestingly, I actually got my full range of motion back pretty quick. I think it took 1 day of rehab to get to like 90%, and then that last 10% took maybe a few months to get back. But my shoulder is also hypermobile, so honestly, it probably shouldn't even have went that far. And healing so quickly was due to a few things. I had a really good surgeon. I prehabilitated my shoulder because I luckily had time to and knew I was doing the surgery. And I also moved my arm way too much while I was in the sling, which is probably not recommended, but it worked out. So I got cleared for full activity maybe 5 months in, and it felt good. I started doing some of the things that I used to do, like I started bowling again, boxing, bouldering, playing volleyball. I was able to spike with no pain for the first time in probably my life. Yeah, everything felt good. Everything felt normal. I was like, is this what a shoulder is supposed to feel like? I was amazed. And then about 2 weeks ago, I was playing some very casual beach volleyball, and I dove for a ball face first, and I swung at a ball this way, and the ball hit this side of my arm, and the shoulder came out forward again, and my shoulder dislocated again, which brings us to now. It's been exactly 2 weeks since the injury. I actually went to go see my surgeon again today with the MRI, and it is confirmed I undid everything the surgery was meant to fix. So I tore the front of my labrum completely off a second time. But luckily, there's no bone loss. So I'm back at square one. And now the real question is, where do I go from here? Well, right now, the plan is to rehab it and kind of play it by ear. If I can't live normally, like the last tear, then surgery might be the next step again. But I've also been thinking about this whole situation a bit differently. Like, it might be teaching me something. And what I think it is it's a lesson in humility. I've always prided myself on being athletic, being that guy who can push himself harder than everybody else. But maybe training that hard comes at a cost. I'm 5'6", around 130 pounds on a good day. Maybe 3 years ago I used to weigh 110, and I used to push myself every day in the gym so I could jump higher. And I did achieve that goal. I was able to reach a 10-foot basketball rim at 5'6". I was able to squat like 250 for reps. I was doing like sets of 6, and I was throwing it up like nothing. I could deadlift 3 times my body weight, so around like maybe 315, 320. And I could bench like 150-ish, weighing around like 110. That's pretty good. And I think about that now, because right now I feel like a very lazy failure. And I'm 23, turning 24 soon. And I kind of think, what was it all for? I'm not a professional athlete, so why do I live like one? I used to play 10 hours of volleyball a day, and I spent nights in the gym pushing myself to the limit. Maybe that's the part I need to figure out now. And I think that maybe a lot of athletes can relate to that feeling. But while I was sitting at home in the sling, not able to do any of the things that were my whole life a year before, it started to get to me. And I got pretty depressed. I felt completely lost. I felt like I was just sitting there all day doing nothing, just a shell of what I used to be. And all I could really do was sit on my bed, maybe play some TFT with my arm that was in a sling very painfully. I even fulfilled a lifelong dream of buying a manual car. I bought one off my friend's brother, and then I got injured. So the whole time I was in the sling, I had to stare at the new to me car that was sitting in the driveway, and I couldn't even drive it. But I didn't make this video to cry about my situation. I know that I'm not in the worst spot in the world. People have it a lot worse. I've also done enough crying about it the last time I got injured, and I'm sure the people around me are tired of hearing it. They're like, "Oh, you injured yourself again? Your shoulder again? Oh, he's crippled man again. Oh." But I think that some people might relate to something else here. Maybe not just the injury. Maybe you all aren't dumb like me and keep playing a sport that injures you, but more so the feeling of losing your identity. I don't think I ever really rebuilt mine after I graduated and moved back home. And adjusting to adult life is hard. Being a grown man with a job, it's not as simple as I thought it'd be. And carrying over the mindset I developed from playing sports, I've done karate since I was 4 too, so I've always had a push myself mindset, and I carried that straight into my career. I graduated, got a job within 2 months, very luckily by the way, but I got a job very quickly, and I didn't really give myself any time to figure anything out. And honestly, I wish I spent more time learning who I actually am as a person, because who I was is not really who I am now. But this time, it's not that I feel angry or sad. There's really only one thought in my head. It's, where do I go from here? And one thing I've always hated is losing progress. I hate games where you lose everything and start over. When I was a kid, I used to play with keep inventory on. And even now I have horrible gear fear in Tarkov, which my friends can definitely attest to. And I think that's why getting injured hits so hard, because it doesn't really feel like an injury, but more so like I'm losing progress. I'm interjecting here, but I've I started off in high school very skinny. I didn't eat, I didn't sleep. I was scrawny, like 90 pounds. And I've watched myself go from a skinny ass guy to somebody who's not, I'm not super skinny. I weigh like 135 ish now. I mean, I don't work out that consistently anymore, but I've seen myself go from what I believed was the biggest I've ever looked to scrawny again, and back and forth so many times over the years. And getting injured was just a time where I got forced to sit and watch myself lose progress. And to me, that is the worst thing in the world. Like, I did everything right, and I still ended up back at zero. But maybe I needed this lesson in humility, that I'm not invincible, that I'm just a fragile human like everybody else. And maybe the world decided I needed to learn it twice. Because I didn't really change the first time. I got healed and went right back to the same habits. So it came back around. Like it was asking me again. Like, how many times do I have to teach you this lesson, old man? But something that came up in a conversation with an old friend is that I tend to operate at 120% all the time. And maybe what I need to do is learn how to move forward at 90%. Something not necessarily not doing anything, but maybe just a little bit less. Another thing I said during that conversation was, it's not bad, it's just worse. And I've thought about that a lot since then, because I actually think that's a great way to describe a lot of things in life. Yeah, it's bad. I'm injured. I'm back at square one. But it's also not the end of the world. It's just worse than what I wanted it to be. And I think there's a big difference in that. And maybe that ties everything together, because if I'm always running at 120%, then maybe I never really gave myself room to deal with setbacks like this. And maybe learning how to operate at 90%, it gives me a tiny buffer, at least. Even at 90%, it's a 10% buffer, and I'll be okay. And maybe that's part of what I need to figure out now. But I rambled a lot during this video. If you don't know me, you've probably never heard me talk about anything, I mean, relatively deep, I guess, if this counts. If you do know me, you know I tend to ramble a lot. I ramble like an old Asian dad. But, you know, I guess the one thing to take away from this is maybe I need to learn to take it easy. And it is true. It's not bad, it's just worse.